Well, I have to admit, I'm a little bit wistful today, given that this is the last of our presentations for the semester. Um, Wednesdays at lunchtime are always a highlight of my week for the really interesting presentations we've had. Um, but we will, of course, do this again in the fall. So we'll just have to enjoy today's and then look forward to September, first week of September for the next one.
In person with a Zoom component?
It could be. We are going to have to see, but that's likely how we'll do it. We were early adopters of the hybrid model, thanks to Kristen Herman and her colleagues in the Office of Digital Learning and Innovation. But we are at 12:02, so I would like to welcome everyone on this call to the final presentation in the Spring 2021 Westchester University Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability, and our office, along with colleagues in the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs, the Office of Digital Learning and Innovation, and the Sustainability Council's Research and Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee, are pleased to be able to sponsor this series. As I was just saying, this is the final presentation in the semester's program. We've had 12 presentations scheduled. 11 have been fascinating, and we know that today's presentation is going to deserve that adjective as well. So without further ado, I would like to pass the digital floor to Yu-Shien, Andrew James, and Grace Bowden.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much, Brad. And thank you everybody for joining us on this Zoom call as we are very excited and eager to present to you some of our findings and preliminary items for our Atlas Stage 1 Zero Waste Assessment for WCU. So just briefly as we begin, we're just going to quickly do some introductions, and I'll pass the floor to my colleagues as well. My name is Andrew James. I'm a graduate assistant working with the Assistant Dean of Students as well as the Office of Sustainability with our Sustainability Peer Education program. And it's really great within this virtual format because I was also asked to kind of follow through with this stage in this activity. So my background is a lot with political science and philosophy, primarily in environmental ethics. That's my undergrad background, but then I came back to school for higher educational policy and student affairs, and I have a graduate certification in education for sustainability. So I'm happy to be here to be presenting, and I will pass it on to our lovely sustainability peer educator, Grace.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I am a senior majoring in communication studies with a minor in environmental health. I've been a sustainability peer educator for the last year, and more recently, I've been an Atlas Fellow working on this with Andrew and Yu-Shien, and it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for including me in this last seminar presentation. I'm very excited to be here as well. My name's Yu-Shien, and I work for the Post-Landfill Action Network, or PLAN for short, as the co-director of Atlas Zero Waste Strategy. And I had the privilege this spring to work with Andrew and Grace on this assessment on Westchester's campus.
Wonderful. So just quickly going through the agenda, we quickly just went through our introductions. We're going to give you a bit of a project background to the items we were looking at within our Atlas Fellowship, some of the Atlas theory and history, methodology, and preliminary findings. And then we'll just kind of close with some questions. And also just to be very transparent, we're very happy for you to interject if there is a very pressing question. We're happy to try and vet those questions as we go along, just for the sake of following along and pinpointing where directly you have that inquiry.
So just wanted to give you all a little bit more information about PLAN, the organization that I work for. So we are a national nonprofit that specifically works with college campuses to educate and inspire the student-led zero waste movement. So we specifically focus on training and skill sharing and providing resources so that students can implement solutions to waste in their own campus communities. We truly very much believe that our generation are the ones that are going to be change makers. The really fun thing about this is Westchester University is a PLAN member. So that means that anybody with a WCUPA.edu address can access all of our membership resources, which include things like program case studies, free registration to all of our digital events, a very, very extensive online store of zero waste infrastructure, like types of like lifestyle, as well as like dining ware and other sorts of products that you might want for a club or an organization or something like that, as well as hundreds of pages of program manuals in terms of implementing zero waste solutions on your campus. So hopefully in a follow-up that we send up, I will be able to send a little bit of information on how you can register for an account, and then you'll be able to explore the membership resources that are available to you at your own leisure. And I'll pass it on to Andrew now to talk a little bit about Atlas theory and how this project came to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yu-Shien. So kind of looking at Atlas theory and some of the history and research findings that led to the creation of the program, and how it was shaped and format for the assessment is really kind of what we want to take a look at. So thinking specifically on how colleges or campus define zero waste was a big initiative for what Post-Landfill Action Network was interested in. So a lot of colleges, within the 2010s and ongoing, are creating a lot of these zero waste initiatives. And I believe it was in 2017 that Post-Landfill Action Network was very curious about researching and kind of finding the trajectory of how these zero waste initiatives were really being developed, or what the goal was, and how these items would be fulfilled if you're going to have zero waste by 2020. That's a large feat. So the goal of the program was to determine and evaluate from an assessment how to create a zero waste action plan. So this is really kind of the trajectory that the Atlas program was integrated to develop. And basically what happens is that the Atlas fellows, which would be different assigned students and interns that are working with PLAN, would be facilitating a zero waste audit through their university. So in reference to those theoretical and institutional implications, we want to know more of the holistic ways to define zero waste and how that can be applied to develop zero waste projects for our own campuses. So kind of thinking about that, zero waste is very commonly defined as 90% diversion from landfill and incineration. This is not necessarily a bad definition, but we will quickly define for you how, or quickly outline for you how this might be a little concerning when we look at the study or how this actually is measured from a data standpoint, because this can be somewhat misleading to actually fulfilling a zero waste initiative or trajectory that's really feasible or pragmatic for our assessment and studies. So considering that definition, really thinking about the zero waste hierarchy and what that means, we want to look at rethink, reduce, and reuse, these top tier items, which are more of your upstream items for zero waste. So these are working primarily to focus upstream solutions, and they're systems of rethink and redesign that allow for us, before the product is put into a diversion method or into a certain stream, we're looking at repurposing these and doing a proactive aspect to this. So that's why they're the top tier. This is an upstream solution. Following suit here, after that, we have recycle and compost, material recovery, and residuals management. a lot of zero waste diversion focuses on this item that is recycling and compost. However, this is a downstream solution. We're encountering the product as we're providing a diversion, or we're putting it into a stream. So this is where this is more working downstream, and this might be tackling something more as a reactive solution. And then finally, we have the unacceptable aspects, which are waste deregulation, incineration, or waste to energy. So these really are unacceptable networks because we're finally encountering the product and having to create a solution for it in a way that really is not conducive to any sort of zero waste initiative. So with PLAN, the focus is primarily on systems change and ultimately closing these material loops. So that's why we really want to look at these upstream solutions, which are that blue and dark green and light green items at the top. So what does this mean for PLAN research findings? Well, as we said before, the diversion metric may not necessarily measure zero waste adequately. We're going to get into more detail about that. Grace will outline that pretty well for us. But the other items we want to talk about with research findings or practical ways of assessing zero waste on a campus is through these other two items, which are standardization. So this is really kind of looking at signage, bins, what we have available and accessible to us that's visible. So standardization in our infrastructure. And infrastructural change has to precede behavioral change. So many of our faculty and students on the call, you probably are familiar with our different standardized bins. Blue is typically recycling, gray is typically waste. Some of these items, if you have spent time in a residence hall, you'll see that we have different standardization for other ways of procurement or zero waste initiatives that are taking batteries or taking light bulbs. So this is where we're trying to create behavioral change, but this really comes with some pretty, not rigid, but holistic encompassment of standardization. Then the third tier here is looking at management. Campus-wide zero waste may require a reshuffle of program management. So as some of our colleagues know on the call, we do have a zero waste committee that is looking to reinforce this initiative, as well as find ways and solutions that will be conducive to our departmental plans, as well as the president's plan for climate action. So these are items where how are we properly networking and providing the communication that's necessary to achieve these solutions? And those two items will be assessed in this model.
So first, let's talk about diversion rate. That is the weight of recycling and compost divided by the weight of recycling, compost, and landfill. So we're going to talk more about why this metric is extremely flawed when considering zero waste initiatives. So in our first example, we have a school or an institution of any sort having 1,000 tons of waste, half of which is going to landfill, the other half is being diverted through recycling and compost. Now, let's say they take on some zero waste initiatives and they are able to reduce their waste by 50 tons per each stream. So now their diversion rate is only 47% as opposed to 50%. This is an example of backwards progress because clearly they have made great success in reducing their waste, but the diversion rate isn't capable of showing that.
Thank you.
So here are the 5 reasons why the diversion metric does not measure zero waste. 1, it just doesn't measure waste reduction. This metric works by prioritizing composting and recycling, which, as Andrew was talking about, are much less ideal downstream solutions. 2nd, it doesn't represent the waste generated per person. It can be easily manipulated to improve an institution's image. So for example, some schools may not include construction and demolition materials in their measurements, while other schools do, and this is going to change their diversion rate. They can easily get away without accounting for tons and tons of their waste produced and the amount that's being discarded and not recycled. And other schools for example, may not have agricultural centers and would not be able to add organic disposal and manure to their composting stream, which would boost their score. Thinking about waste in terms of weight is extremely unrepresentative of the quality and quantity of the materials being discarded. So for example, food scraps, manure, and glass are much, much heavier and will give the impression that a larger percentage of waste is being recycled or composted. Whereas plastics are everywhere and their mass doesn't really represent the amount of waste being disposed of, which severely skews the diversion rate. So number 4, the diversion metric could be partially to blame for the current recycling crisis. So the proliferation of single-use disposable items that are not recycled or composted has caused a massive amount of confusion about what belongs in which bin. If there aren't signs up, a lot of people just throw it all in the trash and they don't really know. Or on the flip side, they just throw everything into the recycling, which is termed wish cycling, and they just assume if it's plastic, they'll know how to handle it, and it's out of their hands, it's fine. And this causes a lot of contamination, which is forcing haulers to just send all of these materials that could be managed properly to incinerators or landfills. So lastly, this metric is really unsuitable for incentivizing upstream solutions such as rethink, redesign, reduce, and reuse, which are much more sustainable solutions to waste. And these are ultimately how we are going to find ways of reworking the goods that we're producing and even how they're being produced. So after saying all of that, does anybody have any questions? No. You can just unmute if you do. Okay.
All right.
I guess
We're
no
still moving along.
Yeah, we'll move it along.
All right. Sorry, I can't see. I have it all minimized.
Oh, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Say just a little bit about how the diversion metric is used, who uses it, and how does that affect the process?
So it really could be used by anyone, but in this case, we're just talking about schools because they're probably really the ones who are going to be calculating this most often. I don't think anyone does this in their own home. But yeah, so right now we're just talking about schools and how they would increase or decrease their waste that's being diverted.
Is this used by haulers, like to establish hauling fees and that kind of thing?
I think Yu-Shien shook her head yes, so I'm going to go with yes because I don't actually know.
Yu-Shien, do you have anything you could articulate with that, or?
Yeah, so firstly, in terms of the diversion metric and who uses it, campuses for sure, it's like the #1 way of quantifying the amount of waste that they're producing. And then also many like companies and campuses and restaurants that are interested in measuring their progress towards zero waste default to the diversion metric, which is why it's so challenging to sort of break down because it is so widely used. I do think that it's also pretty typical for haulers to also be using this and reporting it back to like their clients, essentially, who are interested in having this information. So industry-wide, it is currently the standard for how zero waste is measured.
Thank you, Yu-Shien.
Thank you for the question.
Anyone else, or should we move along?
Guess we keep rolling, right?
All right.
All right, wonderful.
So second is standardization. Infrastructure change has to precede behavioral change. So Erez Yoeli has a TED Talk titled How to Motivate Others to Do Good. And in that talk, he says the 3 steps are to increase observability, eliminate excuses, and 3, communicate expectations. So when you're framing this to apply to a university, it's about making zero waste seamlessly blend into a student's life, because if a system is set up well, it just makes it easier for the end user to make more sustainable decisions. So we can see a great example of this in, oh my God, in Anderson Hall. They have kind of taken some baby steps to following what Yoeli was saying. They have increased observability for the students by putting these signs above the bins across the building. They have eliminated excuses for most people by having it clearly written and organized above their respective bins so that when they look up, they can see whether or not they're making the right decision. And the sign below, I don't know how easy it is for everyone to read it, but it's basically communicating the expectations that the university will prioritize sustainability and will continue to support faculty and students who are leading these sustainability initiatives. So I'll pass it off to Andrew to talk about management.
All righty. Well, in considering increasing observability as well as no excuses, the idea of management, I think, comes into play a lot here as well. And that really is considering, campus-wide zero waste initiatives are definitely going to have to require more of the tiered effect. So we're looking at maybe a group doing this, then we're looking at maybe a department, and then what is the whole campus looking at? So it's this tiered effect that we have to kind of revisit this framework on how communication is really being achieved and in what ways we prioritize zero waste. So this is looking at a student affairs model. I was just kind of considering just using an example of these charts, but can everybody see my cursor?
Mhm.
Okay, so something like residence life here that has a lot of waste that is basically created in the residence halls. This is somewhere where we would want to prioritize a lot of zero waste initiatives. And with that being said, to consider residence life and the management that's within it, we have to look at potentially the housing director, USH, as well as university-owned facilities. And then thinking about facilities management and maintenance and custodial would also have to be in this consideration. So really just kind of prioritizing how we are delineating these sort of projects or coming together to really manage and facilitate a more seamless method is really, I think, the biggest priority when it comes to management, especially for eliminating excuses. So now that we do have plans and policies that have been articulated within our president's sustainability climate action plan, or even facilities having priorities within their policies, as well as residence life prioritizing certain aspects within sustainability, how each of these are somewhat siloed, how do we come to start to really integrate these strategies collectively and holistically and look at them from, I think, closing those material loops? And that really comes with very similar to what we're doing right now at Sustainability Council and maybe delegation into these committees, but more aggressively prioritizing those initiatives is very important to achieving that. So we're going to briefly talk about our experiences as fellows. Grace, please feel free to interrupt me if you have anything you want to kind of add here, but this is more of the comprehensive scope of the task and items that Grace and myself were assigned to do, as well as facilitate for the semester as we were doing the whole Atlas Zero Waste audit or assessment. So just kind of looking at it, for the Atlas Fellows, we had a specific training that we went through. There was the work, which was communication with stakeholders, interviews, emailing, contacting those individual stakeholders. And by stakeholders, we mean the campus and community partners that we work with that would be answering a lot of our questions for our assessment. And then we had meetings with our fellows as well. So our fellows meetings would consist of either troubleshooting some of our strategies or communication ideas. What happens when we don't hear back from a stakeholder? How do we kind of manage that, and what is the urgency for receiving their information? And this was very interesting too, as we observed Westchester, because as I was saying before, we do have these siloed areas of whether it's student affairs departments that are events coordinating or residence life or dining services or facilities. Facilities had a wide array of items that we had to look at, considering construction and renovation policy, grounds, maintenance, custodial, even universal and hazardous waste. All of these individual people who are in charge of those different facets, we had to contact, and we had to have an interview and see their different methods or their communication across board. So now you're seeing how this works. You see that we're interviewing and checking how their familiarity with standardization, as well as their familiarity with campus communication. So this is something that's going to be integrated into that interview process. So with communication with stakeholders, it was really great because we were able to kind of evaluate some of our more intentional partnerships we should really be prioritizing. And that was really neat to see, from buying in bulk potentially with some of these departments to even seeing them being willing to meet with different committee members or council members or our office to possibly instill a certain policy that they would go by for management of their facilities, which is really great to see that willingness. So that was very exciting for me personally to experience as I was discussing with some of our stakeholders. And then the checklist for scoring, I was briefly mentioning it. We will also be looking at that as well, but we had basically a mega Excel sheet, and Yu-Shien is very, very talented in managing this Excel sheet. But we had our interview questions that we would go through and provide their feedback and the notes. And then finally, after we were finished interviewing all our stakeholders, we would score their answers. And I'll be getting into more detail about scoring. Finally, with our fellowship, we will have an exit interview where it will be our advisors, so Assistant Dean Peter Galloway and Dr. Bradley Flam, as well as the plan team, and then myself and Grace, and we will all sit down and review our checklist scoring and then go through any last minute questions or inquiries that we may have. So finally, considering these as office's goals, as I mentioned before, the President's Climate Action Plan does have an item that looks at zero waste development and implementation. So these are things that are prioritized. They are in our university and institutional rhetoric. However, seeing the facilitation or the programmatic initiative really start to make headway will be probably the next steps that we can be looking forward to as we finish up our assessment. And then, of course, dining services sustainability plan and looking potentially at compost. Composting is an item that we do have at dining facilities, but how might we better integrate that into all our different dining facilities, as well as potentially not just compost, but to-go reuse Tupperware, or not necessarily Tupperware, but reuse to-go-ware. So that can be anything from reusable utensils to reusable dishware. What ways could we possibly be integrating that and have more creative solutions that will strategize that initiative is also some of the items that I think I'll be kind of discussing as we do that exit interview. I see we did have comments in the chat. Is anybody able to just quickly tell me those? I'm sorry, my
I can also respond as you're going along too.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Yu-Shien. Anybody have any questions as we continue along? All right, I think we're good. So the methodology, I believe, Grace, are you gonna start us off with this?
Sure. So talking about methodology, Atlas's methodology has been derived from the greenhouse gases scoping analogy, which is that scope 1 is direct emissions from owned or controlled sources. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from the generation of purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling. And scope 3 is all other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain or federal agency. So when we put this into Atlas's kind of plan.
Should I go to the next slide?
Yes, please.
All right.
Scope 1 is hard goods, which is all materials that a campus has direct control over. So they are the ones purchasing, they are the ones disposing, they are in control of it all. So that is your electronics, furniture, office supplies, etc. Scope 2 is your soft goods. These are food and single-use materials. They're the items that the campus purchases, but ultimately can't really control where it ends up. They can't control what bins it goes into. and this includes food waste, packaging, dishware, to-go-ware. There are also scope 3 materials, and these are items that are brought from off campus and they are disposed of on campus. And, obviously the campus does not purchase these items. They don't have any control over them. But if there are systems in place to manage scope 1 and scope 2 materials, scope 3 materials should be able to be integrated pretty easily. So the next slide is the kind of linear version of, where's the rest of it?
Oh, I see.
Oh, okay, I guess.
Do you want me to go back or?
Oh, no, you can just show the whole thing, I guess.
Alrighty.
It's interesting when you can just look at it all. All right, so this is the linear version of system mapping for hard goods. So this is kind of looking at how did it get on campus, how is it collected, and where does it go? So ideally, there is a policy to use a surplus system and the items, but if not, after its use, there is a system for reuse and collection stations and pickup services for these items that are no longer being used or needed. And in terms of logistics, where are they going when they're not on campus? Ideally, this is all ideal, a campus surplus facility would be available to have the room to store this office furniture, for example, or any of these, construction materials. And if you have that space, maybe ideally, again, there would be the option for repair, and which would kind of close this circle for reuse and just kind of keep these items out of the landfill. And then, I mean, if these items need to be broken down, that would be another option. They could be broken down and recycled. The next slide is just kind of the more circular version of this. It kind of emphasizes that this is a circular plan, and this is still for the management of hard goods. And another thing with this is once these items reach a third party, we kind of are forced to just give up control of where these materials end up. And obviously different campuses have different systems in place and different third parties that they work with. So Atlas isn't putting all of these campuses in a box and making every single campus have the same systems. Like, for example, an urban campus is not going to have the room for an agricultural center, and they may not do as well when it comes to composting, for example. So all of this is going to look different on each campus. Then the next slide is the same linear version, but talking about compost food and disposable plastics. So as you can see, prepackaged food has a dotted line through it, disposable to-go-ware and dishware have a straight line through it. The dishware and to-go-ware, we don't need them. We can get rid of them and have zero waste options. And prepackaged food is obviously something that a lot of students will rely on, and that's not something that is really equitable to completely eliminate. But eliminating those items that we can simplifies the rest of the system going forward in terms of, to-go stations, composting, all of the logistics, and all of the dishwashing and all of that stuff. And then the next slide, same thing. It's just the circular version of the previous slide. And I think this one does a really good job of emphasizing that these all do a really good job of emphasizing the fact that Atlas isn't just like, digging through your trash. It's really trying to look for a more holistic, or it's really a more holistic analysis, which is just 100% required if you want these changes and goals to be long lasting on a campus. And things like an industrial dishwasher and a composting facility do a really good job at encouraging this cyclical use of materials.
I think, yeah, like closing up those material loops is really the priority here. And as you can see, this is really integrating a lot of those upstream strategies and trying to be very, I think, intentional at where it's going to meet in providing that method. And then, all right. Yu-Shien, are you looking at this slide, or was I going to grab this one for us?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just answering a comment in the
I'm so
chat.
sorry.
But yeah, thank you, Grace, for providing that really helpful background in terms of the way that the Atlas assessment considers materials on a campus. So as you probably gathered from those few slides, we prioritize and really emphasize a holistic framework for measuring waste reduction. So not just looking at what's in the trash at the end of the day, but really looking at the entire life cycle of any materials, any stuff that is brought onto a campus. So everything from purchasing to use to collection to disposal ultimately. In doing this, Plans Atlas project is specifically assessing the infrastructure, the policy, and the communication that is in place for managing those two major campus waste systems that Grace shared about, the scope 1 hard goods and the scope 2 soft goods. Through the assessment and through these interviews with stakeholders, the intention is to identify any gaps in the current systems that are in place. And ultimately, again, addressing that idea of breaking down departmental silos. One of our main goals is to help the campus establish some sort of zero waste task force. So I know you already have a zero waste subcommittee within the Sustainability Council, so that is a wonderful starting point. As we go along the stages of the Atlas project, the end goal is to help campuses create zero waste strategic plans. And again, encouraging campuses to really push beyond what is currently standard practice and to be visionary in their goals. Re-emphasizing what Grace had mentioned about no sort of like one size fits all. Plan and the Atlas team is here to really guide the campus in terms of setting goals for what zero waste looks like for their campus. So a really fantastic example is the example of composting. So if the goal for the campus is to figure out some way to make sure that organics and food scraps are not going into landfill, there are multiple options for achieving this, but we Plan are not going to be prescriptive in our approach, recognizing that for an urban campus, having an on-site composting facility is pretty absurd, pretty out of the question. So they might find that their approach is to contract out composting services, while another campus that's in a rural setting might find that it is really economical and makes the most sense. Maybe they have agricultural programs as well to first divert their composting and food scraps by, maybe feeding livestock with it first before sending it to an on-site composting facility. So there's a lot of like mixing and matching that you can do in terms of finding solutions and next steps to figuring out exactly how you will achieve your zero waste goals. And that is what Plan is here for in order to help you all do so. And just really quickly going over the main steps of the assessment that Grace and Andrew have been working on this spring. So Plan initiated this program by working with Brad, Amy, and Pete to complete a pre-assessment and a stakeholder identification so that Grace and Andrew would know who on campus to reach out to find this information. Following that, the two of them interviewed campus stakeholders using this campus programs checklist that we've been referring to. Following that, the campus programs checklist is scored. So Andrew will be presenting some preliminary findings in terms of the score. And what you all have to expect from us at the end of the semester is a zero waste score with a program score sheet breaking down that score into a few more digestible components. So looking at, for example, and kind of like programs within each scope so that there's a little bit more of a clear direction in terms of understanding which areas Westchester is doing really well and in which areas could use some improvement. And so that report will come with detailed findings and recommendations that can be shared with you all. And with that, Andrew is going to share a little bit in terms of the preliminary results.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, we're very excited to kind of get the preliminary results solidified and then have that exit interview to provide those different strategies. It's going to be very exciting to see. So just as a premise, as we go into this, this is subject to change in percentiles. given we do have, we might be waiting just for, I believe it's 3 stakeholders to provide their last supplemental information. But other than that, it shouldn't skew the numbers too much. For the most part, it will be pretty consistent to the comprehensive data we have. So again, looking at the way we are scoring or what this means, we're going to kind of look at the zero waste hierarchy one more time. And this is looking at the way we score. So we are able to score typically either 1.5, or I believe it's 1, 2, 3, and then there are credibilities to like half points if possibly met to some of these different checklist or questions. Real quick, that probably wasn't that well explained. I'm going to kind of go into this in a little bit more detail. So for items for system rethink or redesign, these would be scored out of 3. So if some stakeholder might say that they partially have developed this, or this is in policy, but it may not be enforced, this would be where it might be a 1.5 because it's not fully being taken on as an objective or a trajectory for that stakeholder location or where they supervise. Then for reuse, repair, these are items that kind of work within surplus, IT, some of these items, and these would be scored 0, 1, or 2. And this again, those half points are where there are initiatives that are being taken and provided to make sure they are trying to achieve this, but they may not be fully reinforced. So that's where half credit might have been assigned for some of these items. It's also really important to note that there can be potentially a non-applicable kind of way to vet one of the questions. So if let's say there was, do you provide like liquid streams for diversion or liquid streams for waste, and that's non-applicable. This is where potentially the score would be neutral. So they would not necessarily have a score, or it may not be provided. However, for something like liquid waste as well, if they were to say yes, that actually potentially might have been extra credit. So we will also show how there are some ways for the score to actually provide even more reinforcement through some of the policies, procedures, and infrastructure that is facilitated through the different stakeholders we interviewed. So as we kind of begin here, this is looking at the 2 scopes and our scoring overall. So overall, when we look at the hard goods as well as soft goods, we see that there was a possible point load of 818 points for our scope. However, this is not the possible points at all. What happens is, depending on the university, there might be more stakeholders that have assigned hard goods questions, and that is subject to change, as I was saying earlier. So depending on who all is kind of being interviewed and all the stakeholders that are integrated in these questions, those numbers may vary. The thing that would be more important is looking at the achievement metric. And that's really looking at the percentage that's achieved in hard goods as well as soft goods and what that looks like from an overall standpoint. So in hard goods, we see that infrastructure is pretty strong within our hard goods scope. Policy or bins may be a little bit less. And that's where there might be more priority to facilitate or instill certain strategies that would better provide solutions or reassurance to be achieving higher on those scores. And then for soft goods, we're seeing here their infrastructure, again, pretty strong. However, for soft goods, policy was very strong. So this is where we're seeing that policy is instilled in the soft goods scope in what is provided for waste diversion, but may not necessarily be fully provided in the scope for standardization in bins or the overall infrastructure within different departmental locations. So just looking at the score breakdown here again, here we're seeing that we are scoring around, I would say about like 300, maybe just almost 400, but this was getting us to about 43.5 5%, I believe. So this is kind of the total score we have for hard goods so far in our achievement of waste diversion. Then for soft goods, we're looking at a total here, and this is the total breakdown. And this is, I believe, again, around 43 to 45. Actually, if we go back real quick, we can check those real quick. Here we are. So here we have a total of 44, almost 45% of zero waste diversion being achieved. And then for hard goods, we have 43.43%. And then for soft goods, we have 45.92. So again, let's go back. With the soft goods breakdown, what would be important to note is this additional credit. So this is something where it also helps boost and provide a little bit more percentile points for our assessment. Looking at the additional program score breakdown, this is looking at kind of that extra credit, as I have kind of called it. But again, this is where we are being proactive in our communication, standardization, or infrastructure. And this is where we were accredited extra for those initiatives. So here we have received some points here for that. So then next steps, kind of looking at the next steps, we should really be kind of creating a zero waste working group. And I believe that was kind of put on hold, at least for this year, because of obviously the circumstances with the pandemic, as well as the university being more remote and asynchronous with some of its projects and programs and items that we are able to kind of assign a task force to. With that also being said, goal setting and strategic visioning in scope groups would be really interesting in this facilitation. So Yu-Shien, could you kind of outline a little bit more what you mean by the visioning and scope groups for us?
Thanks, Andrew. So basically the scope groups, the scope 1 and the scope 2 that Grace outlined, it is oftentimes most strategic to break stakeholders down into those scope groups. So everyone who works in, for example, surplus property, hard to recycle material management, electronics, universal waste, etc., would work together in one scope group to come to some agreed upon visions and goals for how scope 1 materials would look. Versus in scope 2, these are usually folks from dining services, from residence halls, perhaps, who are dealing with like student initiatives, from event services, from athletics, et cetera, that are dealing with commonly handled goods such as like disposable dining ware, food, plastics, et cetera. And because those are similar items, it makes the most sense for them all to work on strategizing for goals and, again, vision setting in those specific groups. And that is something that plan is available to help facilitate through stage 2, but it's also something that you all can just sort of use this framework and proceed on your own. So lots of options there. And thank you for advancing. Yes, and so that's basically what those scope groups would be doing. They would be researching possible solutions, identifying those gaps and those needs. And since you all are experts on your own campus community, it makes the most sense for you all to be kind of like doing this, understanding and kind of like uncovering of what sorts of like obstacles might be in the way and what sorts of solutions are best suited for your campus. And then finally, the ultimate goal is to draft some sort of zero waste plan that hopefully will be included in a larger plan, such as the climate action plan, giving it a little bit more weight behind it, getting a sign off from higher level administration is oftentimes key to getting both the sort of like initiative as well as funding and investment behind any sorts of zero waste goals and visions that this zero waste working group comes to.
Thank you so much for closing that up for us.
Sorry about that.
No. I apologize. I think I was stepping on your toes, so my apologies.
You're all good.
All righty. So I believe that kind of brings us to the end of our presentation. Again, we just thank you for taking the time to kind of soak in some of the items that we were discussing. And we're just excited. I see the chat's kind of blowing up, so I'll be curious to know. But just to begin, are there any questions? Am I able to stop the share so I can see people? We can always refer back to the slide. So, but.
Thank you, Andrew, Grace, and Yu-Shien. We are at 12:50, and so we often pause at this point for people who do have to leave for another class or meeting. So if you do have to log off, please go ahead. But Andrew, Grace, and Yu-Shien, I hope you're available for a bit more conversation with those of us who can stay. I have some questions, but I always do. So I'm gonna be quiet and let others jump in with questions first, and then I'll fill in if people haven't asked the questions I have.
So Andrew, Grace, and Yu-Shien, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. So I wanted to ask if in Chester County or in the waste stream that Westchester and campus is part of, is an incinerator, the unacceptable part of the zero waste hierarchy, an incinerator at all a factor? I'm asking from the point of view of somebody who lives in Delaware County, and all our trash goes to, well, not all of our trash, but there's the Covanta incinerator that we've been talking to Mike Ewell and the Energy Justice Network about trying to get that to shut down. Mm-hmm. And the short term would be that more of our waste would be diverted to landfills, but that's, you know, as the zero waste hierarchy would continue to be implemented over the years, that would be like I guess this is the importance of strategic planning. Yeah. And I also want to know if the strategic planning would also involve short-term trade-offs with a long-term view for Westchester campus.
So, well, just real quick, just to recap, what specifically would you kind of say?
So the first question is there an incinerator involved at all with Westchester's campus's trash flow? I don't think there is there?
No, yeah.
Okay.
I believe we go through, Brad, you probably would know the waste contractor. What's that contract again, one more time? Is that
right? At the moment, the university contracts with Republic Services, and our landfill waste is taken to the Lanchester landfill, which is on the border between Lancaster and Chester County. And you're touching on that fact touches on a question I have about the scoring system, because Lanchester is a landfill that captures and converts methane and landfill gases to electricity. And I'm wondering, Yu-Shien, Andrew, Grace, does that make a difference in terms of the scoring that the landfill facility we contract with captures landfill gases?
The only problem, I believe, and Yu-Shien, you probably could just reinforce this in case I might flub this up, but the waste to energy practice is actually on one of the more downstream, and we categorize it as an unacceptable solution because we are looking for the material loops to be closed. So we don't want it to be all the way brought down to that point where it's not going to be reused, or we're not able to recycle it or provide it back into a stream. And I think that's probably where we would consider that. Of course, it's great that we're trying to kind of procure it in some way, but since it is just waste to energy, there's a certain situation there that we can't account for. Yu-Shien, do you have anything else to add with that, or?
So currently, the way that the assessment works, we don't have any points allocated towards waste to energy solutions. In fact, it's just not given any points because we don't consider it a zero waste solution. So the way that the points work is that it's really just allocated towards these sorts of the different practices. So like we mentioned, recycling and compost will be awarded 1 point. reusing and repairing our 2 points and reducing and rethinking our 3 points,
Mhm.
which means that any sorts of solutions that involve waste to energy will not be given any points and will not earn the campus any points.
Okay. Walt, I think there were more parts to your question than.
No, I appreciate, Brad, that you made it, whatever I was trying to get at, more relevant to our particular situation on campus. Yeah, I was just wanted to know your thoughts on the strategic planning aspects and possible trade-offs that might be necessary to go on the way towards the ultimate goals.
And you raise a really interesting point. Incineration, particularly at the Covanta plant in Chester, has been a long-time source of environmental injustices and inequities. The university has been going through a new process to identify the next contract for waste and recycling services. And part of the wording of that request for proposals was that any landfill waste that is generated does explicitly not go to incinerators or to landfills that refrain from capturing landfill gases. So Yu-Shien, you explained very clearly why even those solutions are not awarded points within the assessment. In terms of carbon emissions, we hope that using a landfill that captures methane and turns it into energy is preferable to landfills that simply let methane and other gases escape into the atmosphere.
I have a question, actually. I'm wondering, since you all have had to have so many conversations with different stakeholders on campus, and I think that, through the assessment and from what I saw from your reporting, realizing how important it is to have all these stakeholders to have some sort of buy-in to zero waste strategies. My question would be, what sort of responses did you get from these stakeholders? Did you feel like there was buy-in? Was there, an interest in the assessment? Did you feel like, they would be interested in the results and in seeing how they could tweak their operations towards zero waste? What was your general sense in these conversations?
Yeah. Grace, do you want to touch on that a little? And
yeah, I was gonna see who was gonna. Yeah, so I think some stakeholders were like definitely interested. Others were more just kind of like confused with some of the questions. Like, I guess it's not really something that they're like primarily interested in. So a lot of these things, if we were asking if they buy things that are compostable, or if they donate things after they're used, or if they buy in bulk for whatever reason, even if it's not sustainability focused. I feel like it was maybe difficult sometimes to communicate, like, I guess just like how this all works together to make our campus zero waste. But there were definitely stakeholders that were interested and like were really happy that this work was being done. So I was pretty optimistic leaving every interview. So I would say Westchester is pretty interested.
Yeah. Just to kind of touch on that, I think Grace really kind of put into perspective where it was sometimes a challenge, especially if we were talking to athletic services, to explain some of the applicability for zero waste or what we were meaning for some of the questions, especially given that a lot of the questions are standardized in a format where the questions are basically asked almost very similarly across the board. So something like Brad and Amy, as you're going through the questions, or even Josh, when he would go through the questions, he would have familiarity with it. But depending on if you were in events or programming, may not necessarily have the same familiarity on what we meant by MRF or different types of recycling and those different streams of recycling. So that's where it was definitely, I think we were tasked with doing a little bit more of that legwork to really be able to properly communicate that. I think also when it comes to that buy-in, I think it really comes from that institutional aspect. So if it is within policy, so for instance, facilities or dining services, there's going to be interest now because those stakeholders have more of an obligation to abide by those systems thinking and those regulations and strategies, because that's something that has become a priority within the policy and action plans and mission statements in those departments. So that's something that gets exciting, because I'm thinking of, I think it was facilities, and it was one of our stakeholders, but they were saying, if we wanted to make this a policy, please let the Office of Sustainability know. We could easily, quickly integrate this into some of our preliminary like purchasing or planning as we do certain developments. So that was really exciting to hear, because that gives us motivation to really start that network.
The other thing that oh, sorry, Josh, Breed.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
I was just going to add something else that was really interesting that I think kind of touches on Amy's question, was that the first, or I guess the second tab of the spreadsheet was questions for all stakeholders. So like, regardless of like what area you were in, we were asking you the same questions. And that was another really interesting area to see, like, just like the mutual understanding across the campus about our sustainability and like zero waste initiatives. And so like some people were like, yes, we have a sustainable procurement policy, and other people were like, I have no idea, you know. So that was another really interesting part, but I'll let you ask your question.
Actually, the last bit of what you said is kind of what I was asking about, and first of all, thank you for having this. It's a tremendous amount of work that you've had to do to present this. I can only imagine.
Well, we appreciate your excitement with it too, so thank you.
No, and seeing how everything is laid out is wonderful, because it gives you a great perspective to be thinking about it, and also generating questions, right? Which is kind of, we're going to have to be asking ourselves a lot of questions. But I was really happy to see. I know we spend a lot of time talking about recycling and composting and how that's not as important as the diversion. So my question is really about diversion. And it seems like, from what you're saying, is we really need to address purchasing. That's kind of like a beginning point. So my question is, how have other institutions of learning that are our size or comparable, how have they designed departmentally to deal with purchasing? Because there's just so many stakeholders when it comes to purchasing, and this, I'm going to use sustainability in a different way, sustaining our educational process, right? So in chemistry or biology, what kind of petri dishes are they ordering? And, so that's just one element of a billion elements. Facilities, I kind of have an understanding of what we're purchasing. And at least in grounds, we're much more focused on the part two, right? That's kind of like the cleanup, like what happens after it ends up in the bin, or what is the messaging to get it in the bin. But the purchasing, to me, is really, that's where we close that loop. So I didn't know if there's some best practices that are out there that other large institutions have incorporated, like in their hierarchical management system. Do we need a whole department of specialists that this is their full-time job, working with purchasing and all the other departments in order to realize this? I can tell you, when I purchase, sometimes I'm thinking about sustainability, but I'm also thinking about how quickly can I get that in my department and implement, because I can't waste time and I have to make decisions very rapidly. And I know other people, that's one of the roadblocks or barriers that we're up against. Like how do we get help? So that's my question. It's probably the question we're going to be asking ourselves and trying to solve, but I don't know if there's other perspective out there that can help us.
No, it's a great question. And Yu-Shien, I hate to put you on spot, but I feel like you probably would have a lot to say, especially with institutions that are comparable. So if there's anything that any nuggets of information you're able to give us. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to go about this. Again, it is like this is the problem, and the solution will look a little bit different for different campuses, but I can definitely share a couple of best practices. One of the first things is, because you're uniquely situated in facilities, is that correct? Like grounds and facilities?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so one big part, you absolutely hit the nail on the head, closing that loop and really talking with purchasing, because they are the ones who control what gets onto campus in the first place and then ends up in the waste stream. So first of all, increasing communication between you all who are seeing what's in, the waste bins and waste streams, and most likely you are also in contact with the hauler, so you know what's accepted, what's hard to be recycled, etc. And so you all have that information that purchasing doesn't have in terms of what can be accepted in terms of landfill, recycling, compost, etc. So increasing communication and having those teams work together is one first crucial component of addressing that. Other campuses of your size, one problem that we see with a lot of campuses is they have very decentralized purchasing patterns. So every, like department head has a credit card and they can use Amazon, they can do this, they can do that. Some campuses do at least have sort of like a centralized purchasing platform, like some sort of like website, et cetera. And some campuses have actually implemented things like filters, filtering by sustainable purchases. So if you just want to, put in a bulk order for something that you need right away, that can like be bulked in with other campus deliveries. Having some sort of easy to use filter has been effective for a lot of campuses. That oftentimes really does need to be paired with policies that are explicitly stating the expectations for what sorts of products campus staff members are purchasing and bringing onto campus. So having that in a clear and accessible location so that there is absolutely no uncertainty when it comes to sort of like what sorts of things can I purchase, and not having to put in the time and the research into finding what the most sustainable product is, and just having that option already be the default is oftentimes the most successful way forward for large campuses. And also, if you're trying to be efficient and timely.
Again, I have a follow-up question to that. Many colleges and universities have a position called a chief purchasing officer, who really gets involved in policy making, like you've described. Westchester University doesn't have that position. Is that important? Is that something we should be talking about and encouraging the university to consider?
So having a purchasing team of some sort is generally very important. Some sort of department, at least some sort of purchasing department that does oversee purchases that happen on campus, rather than it being very decentralized in different departments having their own purchasing power, because yes, it can get very difficult to track and to enforce in terms of having some sort of consistent campus-wide guideline. So generally, we would recommend that there be some sort of team or particular position that is able and capable of overseeing purchasing across the campus.
Okay. Yeah, your comment about every office having a purchase card, rings true. That is the case at Westchester University, and
Gotcha.
we often, I think, there's a perception. You have
Oh, wow.
There's a perception that allows us to be light on our feet and quick to make decisions and able to do things without a lot of red tape. But you've described clearly how that also creates some challenges to putting in place policies which get us to think before we purchase, about whether we need things in the first place, and if we do, what choices we're making around specific products and services. Yeah.
I have a quick follow-up question along the same lines. You outlined some really interesting best practices just now for purchasing. Is that something that's going to be included in the final assessment? Is maybe some suggestions of best practices to move forward with, or would that be more in like a stage 2 assessment?
So the full summary report that you all will be provided with will have an assessment detailing what's going on in different programs and departments, and then also some specific recommendations to follow up with each of those. Throughout the report too, we try to link case studies where it's applicable. Another place where you can find lots of case studies, and you can also filter by campus size and campus location and sort of like campus demographics to find something that would best suit Westchester, is our program case library, which is available to you all through plan membership. So, and yes, throughout the process as well, if we like think of any like particular campuses that don't have a produced case study, but have an example that might be useful to you all, we are absolutely happy to put you in contact with another member campus.
Great, thanks.
I had one last question, and that's related to your comments about buy-in and support from senior administration. I do feel like we are well situated in having a zero waste committee that has been thinking about these issues. I think the members of that committee are going to be grateful for the work that you've all done in looking at the campus as a whole. So I think this is going to be very useful to the work that we're doing. But that next step of senior administration buy-in it's often a challenge because they have so much on their plate. They are looking at so many things related to the primary core educational mission of the university that sometimes it's hard for these conversations to rise to that level and to obtain that really thoughtful support for the types of policies and changes that we would be proposing with the zero waste plan. Do any of the three of you have thoughts about how we eventually work to develop a zero waste plan that will have that level of commitment and buy-in from all the way to the top of the university?
Andrew, you and Grace had some thoughts also in terms of identifying sort of like there seemed to be sort of like a top-down vision, but not particular like enforcement. Did you want to speak to that?
Brett, this was something I was discussing, with Grace and Yu-Shien, and it was the idea that we have it articulated. I mean, we have the president's climate action plan, and there's it's at least written, there's the articulation that we are committed to zero waste and implementation of those items. And I think what's really interesting in that capacity is if it's now kind of written, it's kind of, if you want to say like written in stone, or that's the trajectory, there's kind of that leverage that we can at least apply in the sense of this is what we've now articulated. We need to make sure we're prioritizing that all our campus partners are also being able to integrate this and have the resources and provisions that will allow them to do so. And I think that's really kind of the way we can at least swing it where it's back in their court, because it's like, if you're saying this, these are the items we kind of need. I know that's a lot a lot more wishful than it actually is in fruition, but the idea that we do have a lot of these items outlined within our different mission statements and the different plans, even between facilities and dining services and the OOS. And that's something where if we have that written and it's kind of been signed off by our administrators, there could be kind of the idea that, well, in trying to really produce this effort, as well as staying relevant to even current socio-political trajectories of climate action that are now being instilled, there's the way, it's a way of kind of showing in a political fashion, we're staying relevant, and we're staying relevant to the sort of missions and items that we need to really, I think, tackle or make sure we start to implement in a more proactive fashion that's going to really account for all the stakeholders that we have worked with, at least within this study. And now that we have a study like this, that also helps in saying, like, we've contacted all these people, they're aware of this, and maybe we can also now, since we have this metric that we've used that has individually assigned everybody a score, we're able to even provide them personalized feedback.
Great.
And even going beyond the current report, the other component to the way that the Atlas framework is laid out is by through stage 2 or through like visioning and strategic goal setting as a stakeholder group and as a working group. We sort of like almost like force the higher administration's hand by having this group of stakeholders who've been deeply involved in this process come together and agree upon a set of goals and visions for what they would like to see the university achieve and sign off on all of that. And then that is presented to higher level administration who see that the rest of campus is buying into this, and it's sort of like the pressure is being put on them to one, step up to the vision, and to the goals that they have articulated already and any sort of like higher strategic goals. And then also using selling points such as what Andrew was saying about staying relevant. The Princeton Review, I think their latest results said that it was like some huge majority of students choose their school based on their commitment to sustainability, environmental sustainability. And so that now plays a bigger and bigger role in determining where students choose to go to school. And I think that can often be a huge selling point for campuses that care about their reputation as well as their enrollment numbers. So just that's one thing. And then the other thing is also matching these goals and these visions and showing the way that they address both obviously environmental sustainability as well as like financial sustainability can often make a huge selling point for higher level administration as well.
Good. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah. We're almost at 1:20, and you've been really generous with your time. But Josh, if you have other questions, please let's keep the conversation going. But
I don't. Thank you for your time. I'm going to sign off. I have a meet with Patty. So thank you all. This was really fantastic, and we'll continue the this conversation.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank
you, Josh. For your involvement in this, Josh.
Thank you so much.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks to all three of you. This was such a great way to end the semester of presentations. And Amy, thank you for all the support you put into keeping this seminar series going so successfully.